Resolution on the Quebec government's proposed legislation banning the wearing of religious symbols by all persons in positions of authority, including teachers. Whereas the Quebec government has stated its intent to propose legislation to prohibit the wearing of religious symbols for all persons in a position of authority, including teachers. Whereas the English Montreal School Board believes in the secularity of the state while still supporting an individual's right to freedom of religion. Whereas the EMSB believes a religious symbol worn by a teacher in no way impacts their ability to teach and provide quality education in a secular state. Whereas the EMSB values inclusiveness and the diversity of its students and staff and respects their personal and religious rights. Whereas this proposed legislation would be contrary to the values the EMSB teaches its children, in particular, values of diversity, acceptance, tolerance, and respect for individual rights and religious freedoms. Whereas the EMSB has never received a complaint from a student or parent about a teacher's wearing of religious headgear or religious symbol. Whereas the EMSB believes this proposed legislation would be contrary to paragraph 2A of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which guarantees everyone's right to freedom of conscience and freedom of religion. Whereas the EMSB believes this proposed legislation would be contrary to paragraph 2B of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which guarantees everyone's right to freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression. Whereas the EMSB believes this proposed legislation would be contrary to subsection 15.1 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which guarantees that everyone is equal before and under the law and guarantees the right to equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination, and in particular, without discrimination based on religion. Whereas the EMSB believes this proposed legislation would be contrary to Section 3 of the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, which guarantees freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of opinion, and freedom of expression. Whereas the EMSB believes this proposed legislation would be contrary to Section 10 of the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, which guarantees the right to full and equal recognition and exercise of his or her rights and freedoms without distinction, exclusion, or preference based on religion. Was moved by and will co-moved by Mr. Feldman and myself, and resolved as recommended by the Human Resources Committee that the EMSB state its strong opposition to any legislation that prohibits or restricts its employees from wearing religious symbols in the exercise of their functions and duties in our schools and classrooms. It was further resolved that the EMSB state its refusal to adopt a policy to implement any such legislation that prohibits or restricts its employees from wearing religious symbols in the exercise of their functions and duties in our schools and classrooms. As the main author of this resolution, I'm very proud to present this evening. I'm very proud of the work that was done in having a public HR session, in allowing our constituents to come here and speak, in the work that was done in committee, and in the strong message that I'm sure we will unanimously send the government this evening. At the same time, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that a resolution like this is necessary in 2019. I'm embarrassed that we're reporting that the minister is going to deposit a bill that is even stronger than what was said was going to be deposited when we had our public session here in February. Supposedly the bill that's going to be deposited tomorrow is going to invoke the notwithstanding clause, which means that nobody could contest this legislation in the courts. I think that this is, I would have hoped that that wouldn't have occurred, and that the pressure that we and many others from other boards and from other municipalities who've passed similar resolutions would have put enough pressure on the government not to invoke such legislation. I think that history will look on Quebec very negatively, and I think the future generations will be embarrassed that such a law, if ever adopted, were ever to be adopted. And I just want to say that I'm very proud of what we've accomplished and what we're going to accomplish this evening. And I hope that everyone continues to fight the good fight, because we need to send the message
Thank you, Mr.
that,
Artone.
thank you, Madam Chair, I'll just conclude that we need to send the message that just because they adopt a bill doesn't mean that the fight is over. And I hope that everybody continues to speak and oppose this very strongly. Thank you.
Mrs. Latanzio, you wanted to speak? Oh, Mr. Pro.
Thank you, Ms. Mancini. I was going to mention this in my report from the EMSAC, the English Montreal Student Advisory Committee, but I just want to mention it now. So if you give me a little bit of leeway. At the February meeting, they passed the following motion. EMSAC unanimously agrees that all present and future EMSB community members wearing religious symbols does not pose an issue because the expression of their religious beliefs does not impose or infringe upon our education and learning. And that was passed unanimously.
Did you also want to speak to, or?
No, that's fine. It just goes hand in hand with the
Thank
previous
you.
motion.
Very proud of them. Mr. McCurry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, I'd like to say I'm really proud that all of us can come to consensus and that we could all get behind this motion. I think it's an important message that we're all sending, and I'm glad that we're looking upon this favorably. The next thing I'd like to do is publicly commend my colleague, Mr. Feldman, sitting right next to me, for having led, I think, probably the first open meeting that allowed members of the public to speak to this particular issue. And if that were ever any demonstration that we are doing the right thing here tonight, that certainly was. And we are doing a good job by promoting this motion and ensuring that we are fighting the good fight. I will also remind everybody that as a member of the Parents Committee, I can report that several months back, we did also pass a resolution looking unfavorably upon this type of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Is it Mr. Feldman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to remind members of the council why we do this. It's obviously based on the principles and values that this school board wants to transmit to the many thousands of children that are in our classrooms every day. But we also represent the linguistic minority school board in Quebec. We're the largest of the linguistic minority school boards. We are a minority, and I think that given that we have organization and we have resources, I think it's incumbent on the school board to defend minority rights in general across the board. Freedom of religion and conscience is certainly one of the values that we impart to our children in the classrooms every day, of course. But there are many, many other rights that are accorded to minorities that we defend at this council. We may have to do so in the new future if Mr. Legault goes even further, as he stated, to go after our elected representation. That is another level of minority representation and minority rights that we also may need to defend in the future. So I just want to remind everybody, and certainly everybody in the public, that there are more challenges ahead as a minority community. But I think that right now, let's start by defending the rights of our neighbors, and certainly new teachers who may consider coming to work at this school board. Let's put our heads together and figure out how we're going to defend those rights into the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you. There are no other speakers. Is everyone in favor? There are no nays, no abstention. Thank you. The motion is carried.